right, Trev. How on earth did primetime Kirk Cousins pull that off?
I don't think that's how you have to start it. I know you're kind of having a little bit of fun starting the conversation like that, but when you look at the Vikings and certainly you look at them up to this point, their record doesn't look great, but a lot of things, I guess, under the surface kind of do. Like, I'm looking at overall PFF grades from this Vikings team, including last night, and they're not really terrible at anything other than running the football. Like, the interior offensive line, okay, could be a little bit better, but the overall blocking grades are about middle of the pack in the NFL. Their passing efficiency or passive EPA per play numbers are actually pretty decent. They're around probably top 10. Defense playing a lot better than I thought when I was actually able to go back and look at the numbers this morning when I was kind of coming up with hey, how did the Vikings do this? And to me, it all comes back to this is a good team, certainly not the most talented the Vikings have ever been, but a good team that has a good coaching staff, a good head coach orchestrating everything, a veteran QB who could still get it done. And their biggest demise has just been the turnovers. And when you go look at the turnovers specifically, I think that people just talk about turnover margin and they just use that term to say, like, oh, look at the Vikings. They're one of the lowest, if not the lowest team in the NFL when it comes to negative turnover margin. A lot of those are fumbles. Like, they lead the league by far with 9 fumbles this year. To me, interceptions are more of a telling turnover stat. Fumbles are like, you just drop the football. Like fumbles are as simple enough as hold on to the damn ball. Like, sometimes defenders get a really good punch on it and you just kind of like tip your cap to the defender and you say, like, hey, great technique. You went for the ball popped out. Good job. But in those instances, that's not really the Vikings' fault. And in the instances that you would say, okay, it's the Vikings' fault, again, it's as simple as hold on to the football. That's the fix. It's not like, oh man, we got to go draft a guy in the first round who won't fumble the football. No, like, everybody on the team should just not have to fumble the football. So for me, I'm not going to say that I saw this coming. Like, I didn't pick the 49ers anywhere, but if I would have been on a show yesterday and somebody told me to pick the game, I would have picked the 49ers. But the Vikings looking competent, good even, to me is not that big of a surprise, simply because the reason why they've lost a lot of the games they have is stuff that's extremely detrimental on the scoreboard, but it's also extremely correctable. And if you simply do not fumble the football, the Vikings aren't a bad football team, and I think they proved it last night.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of the underlying numbers that have said the Vikings have been a better team this season than their record has shown. And actually, depending on some of the ones you look at, there's some numbers that say they're a better team this year than they were a year ago.
Than they were last year. Yeah.
When they were winning all those games and going on this insane run, and everybody was saying this is not going to work out well. Like, this is not the team that it looks like it is. Now,
we need to evolve the QB wins are not a QB stat to just wins aren't a real stat.
Yeah, wins aren't a stat.
Just wins don't matter.
Yeah, wins are not relevant to the discussion. Wins are just a side ancillary thing. This is how we keep track at the end of it. But frankly, it's a waste of everybody's time. Nobody cares. I think that changes without Justin Jefferson in the lineup. Like, this is one of the things is people are pulling out all these charts and numbers and stats and graphs, and it's like, hey, look where the Vikings are. And you say, yeah, but that was the Vikings with Justin Jefferson. Like, this is not the same thing. So what was impressive in 2 parts last night is, number one, Jordan Addison stepped up in a huge way. And it didn't look like that was going to happen right at the start. Was it the very first pass that he threw that was an interception, the slant to Jordan Addison?
It was one of the first passes, if it wasn't the first pass. Yeah.
And that was, okay, it was bad by everybody, but it was particularly bad by Addison, who got owned at the line of scrimmage, couldn't fight across the guy's face, just kind of got out-muscled to the ball and intercepted. And you're like, wow. I literally tweeted, I was like, that's not going to help him get the trust of Kirk Cousins and get all these targets that are going to be there to be shared around without Jefferson. And then, Peyton Manning on the Manning cast was saying, I always like to go right back to the receiver, right? A guy makes a mistake, you need him. Don't go away from him. Go right back to him, get his confidence back. And Cousins did almost immediately. I think they ran a couple of plays, and then he started getting Addison the ball back, and it went from, hey, look, Addison can still make a couple of plays, So he like all the way redeems himself by like ripping an interception away from Charvarius Ward and running it in for a touchdown just before the half.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, Addison was absolutely huge. And you're right. Certainly the team is very different when you take away one of the best wide receivers in the NFL, with Jefferson not being there. But even with Jefferson not being there, and even with understanding the team isn't in that same place, the underlying performances showed you that this was not the floor is about to totally fall out from this team and they're about to just free fall into rock bottom. I don't think Kevin O'Connell's not that kind of coach. Certainly Brian Flores, to me, is not that kind of defensive coordinator. And for as much as Kirk Cousins has shied away from being able to execute the way he's needed to in the big time moments, like Kirk Cousins, it to me is a high floor quarterback. Maybe Vikings fans might yell at me for that. Maybe they've watched the team a lot more than I have, and they'll get on me for it. But this, to me, it was not a situation where I felt like the Vikings were about to bottom out. When Jefferson went on IR, I had some fun on social media, as a lot of people did, and I just quote tweeted the Adam Schefter breaking news tweet with a picture of Drake May. Like, that was it. Right. No context, no words, like just a picture of Drake May. But in reality, I don't think the Vikings are going to be bad enough to get Drake May. Like, I think that they are, because of the lack of talent on the roster, even with them playing better than maybe you would expect looking at the depth chart. To me, they're still going to be floating around the top 10 of the draft. Like, whether it's just inside the top 10, like they're picking 8th or something. 8th doesn't get you Drake May, right? It doesn't get you Caleb Williams. It's not high enough. But I do kind of think that that's where we are with Minnesota. They're going to be a tougher out than certainly their record set up to this point. And if the turnovers kind of regress back to the mean, or maybe like improve to the mean is what I should say, then yeah, I think that this team gets a lot closer to 500 this year than maybe we would have thought a week or two ago.
Yeah, it does look crazily like, because this is part of the narrative on the Vikings franchise, right, is no matter how good or bad they are, they never pick high enough to completely reboot and reset. And this year, because of the way it started, you're like, well, maybe for the first time. And then Jefferson goes down, you're like, all right, now is the chance for them to pick in the top 5 for the first time since God knows when. And now they're going to win enough games that they're still only going to be picking, the fringes of the top 10, and they might win even more. The truly impressive thing, so I think the offense, even without Jefferson, actually has quite a high floor, as you say. Cousins is good. He might not be great, but he's good. Addison is very good, and even yesterday there were a couple more plays that he could have had. There was a questionable bit of no call pass interference when he went out with the cramp. Like, that should have been a pass interference call. He could have had another couple of plays on top of what he had. I think the offense is pretty high level across the board. What was surprising is, and this has been surprising this season, the defense has played quite well. Like, it's a terrible unit on paper. You look at the talent, the personnel, right, and you're like, this has a recipe for a disaster written all over it. And with Brian Flores coming in, you're like, this is not the scheme that everybody is running at the moment, right? It's like the antithesis of what the rest of the league is pivoting towards. Those two high shells, the zone systems, the Vic Fangio coaching tree. Flores is like the opposite end of the spectrum, and then they're blitzing the living hell out of people, and somehow it's working. I mean, he blitzed Patrick Mahomes almost 60% of the time. Nobody blitzes Patrick Mahomes because he absolutely carves it up, and yet right. Mahomes averaged less than 7 yards per attempt against the blitz. Same thing last night with Brock Purdy, 60-something% of the time, and it was working. I mean, he somehow has found this perfect blend between hyper-aggression, but also not blitzing just enough that you can't rely on it coming every single snap. Like, he's somehow sown the right amount of confusion in there so that the blitz is actually having the effect that it's supposed to have.
Yeah, and I want to go back and I want to watch a lot more of the Vikings games to see how much of a trend this is. But something that I looked up this morning, because I agree with you, I think the defense is playing a lot better than I thought that they would. And I wondered how we got to that point. I think it's a little bit of a combination of the depth chart and how Brian Flores is looking at it. Certainly, Ivan Pace Jr. being huge for that. I mean, I'm not going to lie. Like, that dude for what he was at Cincinnati was a small linebacker who could attack the line of scrimmage and really rush the passer. And that, to me, is what Brian Flores is doing with this Minnesota defense. And I think the front has been fine when you pair it with the pressure that he's been able to bring. But what I've loved that he has done, this is something that I looked up, because Cam Bynum had a phenomenal game. And he is having a phenomenal season. He's one of our highest graded safeties. Got 2 interceptions and a forced fumble last night. He's playing with his hair on fire. He's playing super confident. He's a guy who played corner in college, and they moved him into safety because, probably doesn't have the athleticism to play corner. But as a safety, he's a plus athlete. And if you pair that with really good instincts and confidence, so now you're talking about a big-time playmaker like somebody that we saw last night. I felt like they were doing a lot of unique things in coverage, specifically with 3 safety looks where they would play too deep, but they would almost let Cam Bynum do whatever he wanted. Like, he was this middle of the field defender who they just said, you got great instincts, go read where you think the ball was going. Because there was at least one of the interceptions, I know for sure. They were running, and Shanahan was running a clear out and over the middle concept. It was a dagger concept, and they do this with Brock Purdy because it makes it pretty easy. Like, you think of Mills concepts as well. Mills concept, dagger concepts. You're basically reading what the safety is going to do. Well, you're reading the coverage pre-snap. You're seeing if it's open or closed over the middle of the field. And then you are looking at what the safeties are doing to one of the specific routes, knowing that, okay, if they play shallow, the deep one's open. If they go deep, the shallow one's open. And these are what makes it those quarterback-friendly reads that people talk about with Brock Purdy and Kyle Shanahan's offense. The Vikings essentially set up in a certain pre-snap look with their safeties, and then they pretty much just told Cam Bynum, go be the opposite of how the safeties are going to play this. So if we're going to have both of the safeties go deep to cover the clear-out player and the dagger, we want you to fire underneath and go get that over the middle, that dig concept. And I know specifically on one of those interceptions, that's exactly what it was. Brock Purdy did not expect that player to be there because he doesn't see a lot of 3 safety looks. Right now, the Vikings have played the second most 3 safety looks of any team in the NFL up to this point. And I think it's because they have a player in Cam Bynum to be that third safety to truly just give them that middle of the field presence. And if you're sending one of your linebackers in Ivan Pace Jr. at the line of scrimmage a lot, because you know that's what he does well and you're playing to his strengths, then for a quarterback, they'll look over the middle of the field and they'll go, hey, there's less bodies here. There's less bodies over the middle of the field. One of the linebackers just blitzed me. They'll think it's open, and then Cam Bynum will come out of nowhere from this like deep left safety look that you weren't even accounting for, but at the snap, he's firing over the middle and you just don't see it in time. So it's a long explanation to say this is a tip of the cap to what Brian Flores is doing, because he's taking a depth chart that, like you said, not the most talented depth chart in the world. It's not this, hey, we're going to line up and just rush 4 because we got the defensive line to do it and we got the coverage players behind him to do it. He's got to get creative, and he's being really creative in the right ways by playing to his players' strengths. And I think that you saw him get the better of a really great coach in Kyle Shanahan, at least in the really big, impactful moments last night.